The Alliance is really, we are a nonpartisan organization. We do not endorse political candidates, but we think it's core to our mission to provide good information to our members, particularly on issues impacting the business community, and provide opportunities for you to get to know policymakers who can impact those issues. So we're delighted that Tom was still able to join us today. Our moderator today is Susan Marshall. Susan is an author, speaker, facilitator, and founder of the Backbone Institute, a private practice dedicated to improving competence, confidence, and effective risk-taking. Is that what you're doing today? Since 1997, she has served a wide variety of public, private, and nonprofit organizations, domestically and internationally, facilitating hundreds of events along the way. Susan is a member of the Waukesha County Business Alliance Board of Directors. We are so lucky. She is a facilitator for Leadership Waukesha County and chair of our Education Policy Committee. Just a quick note, today's program is being recorded and will be posted online. So with that, I will turn it over to Susan Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suzanne. Welcome, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
This is, as Suzanne said, a little bit of a change in format. So we'll proceed kind of as we have planned to get started, and then really kind of open it up for a conversation with all of you. I think it's a wonderful way to get to know Tom. Tom knows that I will ask questions off the cuff, but in good spirit of learning. So, if I may introduce Tom, and then we will ask you to provide an opening, 2 to 3 minutes. Tell us about yourself. I will tell you about Tom first. Tom Palzewicz. Yes? Did I say that right?
Yep, absolutely.
2 C's and a name. He is a Navy veteran and small business owner running to represent Wisconsin's 5th Congressional District. Tom graduated from UW-Milwaukee with a degree in accounting after 6 years in the Navy, 4 of which he served on a nuclear submarine. I hadn't thought about that one first. After school, Tom spent 15 years in the banking industry, working with risk management before starting his own small business. Since 2004, Tom has co-owned a business coaching firm that specializes in teaching small business owners the skills needed to grow their business. Tom has been a member of the Waukesha County Business Alliance for more than 10 years and has taught a leadership class in partnership with the Alliance for 3 of those years. Tom and his wife, Terry, live in Brookfield, where they raise their 3 children. Welcome, Tom.
Well, thank you. So I'll start by just thanking Suzanne and Amanda for putting this together. I know it was a lot of hard work, and I really appreciate the Waukesha County Business Alliance for doing that. And thanks to Susan for moderating. I'm glad you stepped up to do this. And then just thanks to everybody here for coming, because I know it's probably been a busy week for you, but taking some time out to really learn, I think, is really important. So one of the things I wanted to at least start with is, as a business coach, so I've been working with business owners. In fact, I've worked with some of you in the room. And one of the things I think about is, as a business owner, how do you take a step back and create a vision? And then once you have a vision, how do you really create some kind of strategic plan to execute on that vision? How do you set goals and feel like you're making progress and moving forward? And one of the things I realized a long time ago is our country really lacks that vision right now. And I think it's something that's causing us, at least from a daily perspective, to be under, we're under constant, I wouldn't say attack necessarily, but we're exposed to different ideas on a daily basis. And I know when you lack a vision, it's hard to put those ideas into context. So one of the reasons I'm running is because I really want to help go to Washington and say, let's take a big step back. Let's figure out where we want to be 25, 50 years from now. What's the vision for what we want to create? And then how do we create some kind of plan that outlives even somebody who's running for 2 years? And then really start to put some goals in place and put some measurements in place to feel like we're getting there. Because I personally believe that government should work in the background. It shouldn't be at the forefront of what we do on a daily basis. And I'm a big believer in country over party, because I just believe that there's a lot of things that we need to start working on, and it just feels like we're not getting to them. So that's the biggest reason why. So with that, we can start with the questions.
Thank you, Tom. Well, my very first question has to be what makes you believe that you can go to Washington and get people to your vision of vision, right? It's a very different world. What are you thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think when I decided to run, in fact, there's a few people in this room who questioned that decision about running, because after being in business for a while and understanding that in the business community, there are things that need to happen in order to move your business forward. They said, why would you take this on? But it really, my 6 years in the Navy and those 4 years on the Navy submarine really taught me servant leadership. And servant leadership to me is being able to take a step back and think, all right, how do we lead for the good of everyone? And I just think right now in Washington we have a lack of servant leaders. There's so much discussion about what each individual wants or what the party wants, and we're losing the fact of what the country wants. So when I looked at it, I said, look, there are certain things, because I've been out knocking on doors for the last, and I will tell you 18 months, and I'll just segue briefly into this. I'll spend 18 months running for a 24-month job. And when you think about that, that just sounds a little bit crazy, doesn't it? And here's the tough part though, is that means when I'm elected, I'll get 6 months to do my job, and then I'll have to turn right back around and spend 18 months rerunning. How does that help us? How does that get us anywhere? So the idea of creating a vision means that we can stay focused, because everybody does this in their business. The hardest part is staying focused on what you really want to get done, because there's all this noise, there's all these other things. It's that how do you stay focused on that vision to say, how do we get there? And people care about healthcare, they care about education, they care about infrastructure, they care about the things that the government we've ceded to make sure something happens there. And I think what's getting lost in all that is we're not working on the most important things.
Well, so let's talk. This room, we're all concerned about workforce, right? More jobs than people to fill them. What, in your estimation, can be done in Washington to help our situation for jobs in Wisconsin?
Yeah, let's start local. Who was at the 100th anniversary dinner for the Washington County Business Alliance? Who saw Joel Quadracci stand up and say there's 500 job openings? Unbelievable, right? 500 job openings in Washington County that they're really struggling to fill. Yet there's high unemployment in the city of Milwaukee. Part of building part of workforce development isn't even workforce development, it's transportation, it's infrastructure. How do we build an infrastructure to get people to where the jobs are? Because I don't know if you know this, but probably in the 80s, people used to move for jobs. I think the number was about 20% of our population would pick up and move for a job, because you knew if you were moving for a job, there's a chance that that job would be there for a while. That number is down to about 11% right now. And people are looking at it going, why move for a job that I don't even know if I'm going to be working there in 2 to 3 years? So how do we build an infrastructure to get people from one place to another? But more importantly, how do we take a big step back? Because there are 1.1 job openings for every person who's unemployed that wants a job right now. 1.1. So the bigger picture is how are we going to find more workers? And this really leads me to immigration, because we need much faster and much better legal immigration to start filling some of those jobs that need to be filled, because that's how the economy grows. The 15 years in banking taught me really was how the economy grows. Because I did risk management for banks, so I had to watch the economy every single day, so I did hedging. And I really had to understand, all right, here are the drivers of the economy, and about 70% of the economy is driven by consumer spending. So if wages are flat and immigration is down, how's the economy going to grow? Because I don't know if you've looked around, but the number of people that we're making on an annual basis isn't replacing the number of people that are dying. So I think that the numbers I saw last is about in 2025, Wisconsin's going to have about 45,000 job openings that we're going to struggle to fill. So this is a serious issue, and we need to start doing some kind of comprehensive study on how do we solve it. And I think at the federal government, we need better idea of how do we create more job opportunities in the right fields, because I think IT is one of those areas we can invest more in. We need more infrastructure. So there's a whole bunch of things at the national level, but I think we got to get working on it. And I will tell you, the most interesting thing is people say, well, what are all your ideas? And I think as a congressman, the most important thing is to understand is how do we bring people together to think about things, because I can't possibly have all the ideas. And I think you know this in your business. If you think you're the only one that can have all the ideas, it's very hard to run a business.
Well, and I think you just hit at the nerve of what is on everybody's mind today, and that is great. Sounds great. We're with you. You're intelligent, it makes sense. We've got a tribal, highly partisan environment in this country. What do you do about that? How do you bring people together? In your own mind, as you've thought about it, you know the cast of characters for the most part. How do you bring people together and settle them long enough to have this kind of a dialogue?
Who's ever had a discussion with somebody from a different tribe or political party? All right, so when you state your position and fight for your position, what happens? How does that conversation go? Who's ever convinced somebody that they're wrong and you're right? It's very difficult to do, isn't it? So one of the skills I learned as a business coach a long time ago is when you state something, the other party has two options. They can either agree or disagree with you. When you ask a question, it's a whole different dynamic. So I learned a long time ago that if you really want to talk to people, it's finding out what do they care about. What are the drivers? What are the real issues? What are the things behind the issue? What are the things that they're concerned about? What are their fears? What are their hopes? And having a dialogue around that. Because right now we're in a very divisive, I think I just read a poll this morning that showed I think 80% of Americans aren't happy with what's going on. As I was talking to a business group the other day, I'm part of a round table. And one of the business owners said, you know, I don't understand it, but I'm anxious all the time. Things are going pretty well in my business, but I'm still anxious. Because we've created an environment of uncertainty. And it's hard to break through that uncertainty when we don't talk to each other in an intelligent manner. So I think it's imperative for all of us to be able to take a step back and ask more questions about what do other people want. I'm a big believer in a win-win philosophy. And the only way to get to a win-win is how do I understand, how do I find out what the other person needs? And then how do I make sure I communicate what we need to get there? Because who's ever compromised? Anybody ever compromised? Yeah, how does that feel? It's like we both lose just a little bit. And that win-win is all about how do we communicate and say, all right, here are the issues that we need to solve. Here are the things that we need to consider along the way. There's got to be compromise. There's got to be a way to get there.
So let's talk a little bit about infrastructure because it's huge. What are your thoughts on the massive infrastructure proposal in Washington for 2019?
Well, it's good that we're talking about infrastructure. How many of you have looked around at our roads and bridges lately? You know, the interesting thing is I was in Watertown a couple of weeks ago, and the entire southern third of the city of Watertown doesn't have broadband. And I thought to myself, how do you live in a community like that and not have broadband? How many of you could get by without broadband? I don't see any hands up. You know, because I'll say this, my opponent is on record as saying we don't need the internet. And when I think about that, it boggles my mind a little bit to think that in this day and age, there are still people that don't think that the internet is something that we rely on a regular basis. We rely on it to do our jobs. We rely on it to study. There's most high school students and college students absolutely have to have access to the internet to make things happen. So do we need more infrastructure spending? Yes. I think the president has put together a proposal that's a great starting point. I think there needs to be a lot more investment in roads and bridges. Here's the other thing though, and I think we stopped doing this a while ago, is we used to invest heavily in universities from a research and development standpoint. And a lot of the things that we take for granted today were because of those investments. We had no idea if they were going to create jobs or what the outcome was going to be. But giving money to people who sat around and thought about how to fix the problems that we have, I think is a really good idea. How do we get back to being able to do that on a regular basis? So yes, we need to invest in infrastructure. I think it needs to be a top priority. It's one of the things we talk about on a regular basis, because I feel that's part of what government should be providing in the background, because when we have a solid infrastructure to build our businesses off of, it helps. When our infrastructure is suffering, we struggle with our businesses. So I think it's really important to make sure that's a priority.
So as business people, we look at here's the need, and here's the available resources. And here's the need, and here's the available resources. What do we do about funding? We support a national gas index gas tax.
I think we need to raise the gas tax. I don't know if you know, but it hasn't been raised since 1993. It hasn't been indexed to inflation. So a lot of what's been going on is we haven't been investing back in the Highway Trust Fund. The Highway Trust Fund, I think the last time I looked, was going to go negative in 2021. So the bigger picture is we do need to invest. And here's the thing, in your business, do you know investment is a good idea? How many of you invest in your business on a regular basis? Raise your hand, I just want to see it quick. All right, so you're investing. Why do you invest? You expect a return on investment, don't you? It's one of the things that we don't really do very well at the national level, especially in government, is we don't take a step back and say, all right, if we're going to invest, what's the expected return? And I want to bring that measurement philosophy to the federal government and say, all right, if we're going to invest, let's invest and make that happen. Do we need to raise some taxes? Absolutely, because here's where we're at. When Jim Sensenbrenner took office in 1978, the federal debt was $772 billion. That's with a B. You know, in inflation-adjusted dollars today, that's about 1.9 trillion. Our federal debt right now is close to 21.7 trillion. You know, all the tax cuts that we've done over the last 30, 35 years, all it's done is pushed our tax load onto the next 2, probably 3 generations. Our interest alone at the federal level runs close to $300 billion. Imagine what we could do with $300 billion a year from an investment and infrastructure standpoint. This is the part I've never really understood about us as citizens. We should demand that before people cut taxes, they should figure out how to make government work more efficiently and more effectively, so then they can return some of our tax money. So it's not the other way around.
Everybody says that, Tom.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody says that.
Yep.
What are you gonna do? What will Tom Palzewicz do?
Yeah,
about
the biggest thing is going in there and saying, okay, what are we working on? Because I know I'm actually working with some government entities right now, and we're working on the fact of how do we make things work better. How many of you invest in your business to make it work more efficient, more effective? You do managerial training, you do leadership training, you do all this training. You put on great training programs at the Waukesha County Business Alliance. Businesses invest in what they do. Here's the thing, in government, we don't take the same track. We don't take the same mindset of investing and making things work better. We either decide they're working or not working, we either fund it or don't fund it. So that has to be step number 1. Step number 2 is I think we need a more solid civil service, legislative rules. We need to protect what we have in the government from the whims of politicians. One of the things I don't like and what I don't understand is when we have a change in administration, they can change the way we go about doing business. No laws have been changed, but we change the way we go about doing things. I'll take the EPA as an example. You know, our EPA right now is not doing its job and nothing changed. We didn't change any laws, we didn't do anything differently. It's all about funding. And imagine working in a culture where you're working toward a goal and a vision, and suddenly you're told not to do it. You know, government jobs are just like any other job. People who work in government are just like anybody else. It's important for us to understand that the vision and the culture are really important to them also. And if we work on that, we have a chance of making government work better, and we get more for our tax dollars. So that's what I want to start working on. Because I think I bring a unique set of skills to be able to do that.
Do you run the risk, and I ask this with tremendous respect for you, who you are and how you are, but do you run the risk of sounding painfully naive, entering a system that is long-standing, that is crusty from the get-go, and here comes this bright-eyed, eager, smart young man? Realistically, what, I mean, isn't that part of what you need to think about as you're putting your ideas together? What's your in?
Well, first off, thank you for calling me young. Because I'm 56, so it makes me feel good. You know, I think it takes a certain naivety. Anybody in the room start a business? How many people told you don't do it? It's hard. It's crazy. You know, how many things have you done in your life that if you think back, a whole bunch of people would have told you not to do it, and it was hard, yet how much did you learn from it? And how much did you actually bring back to society with doing it? So I'm looking at this as the same way. And I'm not, who's ready to give up on democracy? Anybody in the room ready to just say, no, our government doesn't work, we should stop? Of course not. We need people that want to go and have a certain level of naivete and say, okay, we're going to work on this. Because here's the thing, the best part of what I've been doing for the last 14 years is I've gotten to really understand how people work. And Susan, I think you know this better than anybody else in the room. People work in a certain way. People want to be understood. They want to be heard. They want to feel like they're part of the process, and they want things to move. But the interesting thing about government is we argue about what's the final solution instead of trying to take a first step. I think it's imperative for us to do a lot more first steps and and then reevaluate and move forward, because that's how business works. There's no set of perfect information to work on. You take a step, you figure out if it worked or not, and then you take another step. We don't do enough of that. Congress used to pass around 800 bills every 2 years. Now they're down to about 200. Because we just don't work together.
I think that's part of it. The first thought that comes to my mind that made me kind of smile a little bit is how many more regulations do we need?
Well, it's a great comment. I'd love to talk about regulations a little bit, because I worked in banking for 15 years in a heavily regulated industry. But I was also on a nuclear submarine where every 6 months they came in to test to see if we knew what the heck we were doing. So there's a certain amount of regulations that make a lot of sense to me. The thing is we have regulations and then we have the criminal code. And what we're not doing enough of is using the criminal code. I spent 5 years as treasurer of U.S. Bank's mortgage company during the heyday of mortgages from 2000 to 2005. And we were called onto the carpet. I had to go to Minneapolis and stand in front of Jerry Grunhofer, and they called us to the carpet and they said, you're not making the same amount of money as the Wells Fargo's, the WAMUs, the Countrywines of the world. And we said, look, there's tremendous fraud and risk in the system. And they said, well, why is everyone else doing it? And we said, because we don't know, and we're unwilling to take that kind of risk, but we also want to operate with integrity. Because the interesting thing about integrity is it doesn't happen when everybody's looking at you, it happens when people aren't watching. It matters about what you do when people aren't watching. It matters about if you're congruent to your core values. And by doing that, it eventually, U.S. Bank went from number 13 to number 3 in the country right after the crash. I had left already. But the bottom line is when we operate with integrity, we have a chance of making it.
Foreign language to the Washington structure. I want to talk a little bit about the tremendous noise in the political system. We're talking about healthcare, education, immigration, infrastructure, federal deficit, taxes, tariffs, jobs, cybersecurity. How do you think about all of it? How do you prioritize it? And where do you start? You said you connected some of those dots because you were talking in the beginning. Well, where do you start with the cast of characters that are focused one on the other, to the other, to the other?
Yeah, part of it starts with getting Congress to do their job more. So
you can be the good cop.
Well, I think it's important, and I just want to make sure I get the name of this group right, because we just signed onto this platform. It's called Break the Gridlock. So there's a group that's working on breaking the gridlock, and what they want to do is they want to change the rules of how Congress operates so that more bills see the light of day, and there's more bipartisan approach to bills, because I think we really need a lot more bipartisan legislation. And I'm committed to make that happen, because if we don't have bipartisan legislation, then we end up with this, when one party's in office, they try to undo what the other party did, and we're always moving backwards instead of forwards. So that's step number one. And I'm a big believer that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. We can do more than one thing at a time. We do this in businesses all the time, don't we? We work on 3 or 4 different strategic things on a regular basis. And the 4 main things that we care about are healthcare. I think we need to move to a universal coverage type system. We need to do it in a measured pace. But here's the thing I think about as a business owner, and a lot of you are probably going through this right now. How many of you are involved in choosing healthcare for your employees? Is it fun? Do you feel educated? Do you feel like you know what you're doing? Do you add anything to the process? I've always thought that as business owners, I'm looking at it going, I'm not adding really any benefit to this. Now imagine if healthcare was decoupled from labor. I think we'd have a lot more entrepreneurship. I think it'd be easier to start a business. I think job portability would be easier, because I think the jobs of the future are people are going to work here for a couple of years, or here for a couple of years, or we may even end up in a situation where people want to work a little bit over here and a little bit over here. If we decouple healthcare and we have healthcare covered, which is what most of the other industrialized countries in the world have figured out, it creates a competitive advantage from a business standpoint. It's just a different way of paying for it. I think there's a Koch study that just came out and talked about how if we move to a Medicare for all system, it'll cost $32 billion. But in the fine print, it said there might be an additional savings of 32 trillion. There might be an additional savings of $2 trillion because we'll be able to start having healthcare costs go down.
So that takes me back to your comments about having conversations with people. There is, certainly everybody's health care is a very personal and emotional issue, as is the notion that we're free individuals and we don't want government running our lives. Couple those two, how do you break the fear, the idea that I've got what I've got, and if government takes it away from me and tells me what to do, which is the conversation today, right? How do you break through that?
Yeah, it's interesting. How many of you have traveled to Europe or other countries? Have you asked them about their healthcare system? Yeah. I have. You know, I actually have a client in Portugal, in Lisbon, and he has a lifelong illness, and he has to take medication on a regular basis. So I said, all right, how does healthcare work in Portugal? And he said, first and foremost, Tom, the most important thing you need to understand is nobody here worries about their health. In this country, we still have people going bankrupt. We still have people who are worried about whether they're going to be able to buy medication or have to buy their groceries. In other countries that have figured this out, nobody has to worry about that. It's a huge look, because I've been talking to a lot of people. Every door we knock on, every group we talk to, healthcare is the #1 issue that keeps people up at night.
What's real in the conversation? What's real about healthcare? People have been scared to one position or the other.
Yeah, and I think that's an area where if we talk, we know we can create some common ground and move toward. The Affordable Care Act, which people didn't like 2 years ago, now like today, is a step in the right direction. It's getting people covered, because until we get people covered, it's going to be hard to lower costs. And that's really where the problem is in our healthcare. You know, we have, I think, per person, the average healthcare expense in this country is $10,000. When you think about a family of 4, it costs them $40,000 for healthcare. Average wage of a family of 4 is $62,000. How are people going to afford going with their healthcare moving forward? And the other part of that, let me just finish this up. The other part of that is we now have a system that people are somewhat reticent to want to use. Because even though you have access to healthcare, even though you have insurance, we have high deductibles and we have high copays. How many of you know somebody who doesn't want to go to the doctor because they know there's going to be a big bill? It's happening. So not only do we have an expensive system, we're working toward an environment where people don't use it. And we need to be a lot more proactive on healthcare. We need more primary care physicians. How many of you know your primary care doctor by name? Yeah. How many times do you go, or how many times do they say, I want to see you more often? Because we want to be more proactive with your health than reactive. There's a lot of people that can't afford that. There's a lot of people that, therefore, the system is using a reactive process where we need to be a lot more proactive.
And I think from a policy standpoint, we get health insurance and we get health care and we wish them together, and they're not the same.
Nope.
And then you look at where is the accountability. Is it my insurer's responsibility? Is it my responsibility? Is it my employer's responsibility? How do you think through all of that when they get all mashed up and it's one ball?
Well, right now, I don't think there's anybody holding the health business accountable for healthcare costs. So I think that's sort of been abandoned. You know, we had a healthcare roundtable, and we had a doctor, and we had an administrator, and we had a nurse on the healthcare roundtable, and they talked about how there was a push toward quality care, because quality mattered as much as cost. But that's sort of gone to the wayside. There are small pockets of people trying to do that, but right now it's all about, you know, the insurance companies need to make money, and the healthcare facilities are making money, and they're building more hospitals that we don't need. Who's in charge of making sure we're utilizing that infrastructure properly, because those are the costs we're bearing. How many of you feel like there's transparency in healthcare costs? You know, here's the other thing though. If you're having a heart attack, are you gonna call 3 hospitals and find out what the cost is? Or are you gonna say, get me there and save my life? So we've gotta work toward a better process to be able to say there's catastrophic things that we know we're gonna pay whatever we need to pay to keep people alive, and then there's the ongoing process of health.
So let's pretend that's your primary issue as you get to Washington. How do you help everyone in this room lower the cost of providing insurance to our employees?
Well, I think we need to decouple the healthcare market from the insurance market. I think eventually, like every other country has figured out, insurance just adds a layer of administrative cost.
How do you think about that?
Well, if you look at Medicare, I think the last time I looked has about a 4 to 6% administrative cost embedded in it. And the rest of healthcare has about a 20% administrative cost. So by bringing everything, I think we can lower the Medicare age down to around 50 to start with, to start covering a lot more people from a Medicare standpoint, and use that administrative cost process to cover people, and then eventually get everyone else covered. But there has to be an ongoing process. But last time I looked, there's like 2.5 million jobs in the health insurance market. We can't just flip a switch and say, let's move to a different platform. We have to do it in a different way, because those jobs are gonna get disrupted, and we need to make sure they end up in a good place.
And in the meantime, we need the funding to continue. How do you pay for a new system, a new way?
Yep, and right now we're paying a lot, and we're not getting a lot. So I think that there's gonna be a transition period. Is it gonna cost money to transition? Yes. But here's the thing, if we don't start transitioning now, the cost of healthcare is gonna keep going up, and it's gonna be less and less good for the rest of us. As a population, for the first time, I think in our country's history, our life expectancy actually went backward last year. So if you think about that, we're not getting healthier, and the cost of the system keeps going up.
How would you start to lower our costs?
I think the starting point has to be moving to a bigger group of Medicare, and then keeping those pre-existing conditions covered, and making sure people under 26 are still covered. Because the more people we can get covered, it's shown that it starts to lower costs within the system itself. The way I think about it, though, is there's a basket of costs. Government participates in Medicare, participates in Medicaid, participates in the VA system. So the government's already in our healthcare. And the other part is we've got all these insurance payments, and there's, like I said before, there's a higher administrative cost. And if we can start to mobilize that, move that, if we get a whole bunch more people on the Medicare, there's gonna be a lot less people on insurance, and it'll start to lower the costs.
I think we can continue this discussion and get a lot of different questions and ideas. I'd like to shift just slightly, it's a big deal, the national debt and our deficit. We keep having these needs. We actually have more tax payments coming into the government now, and yet our debt continues to skyrocket. It is not tied to any one party at this stage. It's been ratcheting up over a couple of generations. What do we do about that?
Yeah, and I will respectfully disagree with you that it's not tied to one party. Because there's been 3 instances where we did a tax cut with the idea that we would use the Laffer curve, which means that if we did a tax cut, tax revenues and tax receipts would actually go up. It's been disproven 3 times now, yet we still do it. So we cut taxes in the 80s, the deficit started growing. We cut taxes in the early 2000s, the deficit started growing. We cut taxes again. Right now, who would say the economy's doing well right now? Should the government have close to a balanced budget right now? This is what I look at. When the economy's doing well, we should be balancing our budget. And right now, we're actually going to have close to $1 trillion deficit next year when the economy's doing well. We're coming into another recession probably in late next year or early the year after that. What's going to happen when we hit a recession? That deficit automatically goes up. So I think fiscal responsibility starts with we should be cutting taxes until we make sure we use that money more wisely. Because all we've done, because by cutting taxes, there's this idea that we've been getting our money back. All of us in this room, if you have gray hair, all we've done is shift our tax burden onto our children and grandchildren and possibly their children. Because it's going to take years to pay off that $21.7 trillion. But I look at taxes as not so much as a dollar amount, it's really a percentage of our GDP. And if you go back in history and look, over the last about 40 years, our tax receipts have been about 17% of GDP, and our outlays have been 20% on average. So we've been running a structural deficit for years. So I think it's important that we stop running a structural deficit. And if we really want taxes to go down, we should do the hard work of making government work better and do a better job of deciding where to spend our money first before we're allowed tax cuts.
And I would go back to the question, how?
How? Well, we need to raise taxes back up.
And that is the red flag Way in front of all of us, I'm gonna
Sure.
raise your taxes.
But we're all adults, we all know. You know, you can't fight a war and lower taxes. You can't increase the military budget and lower taxes. In your business, you've never fired customers in order to force you to get spending under control, have you?
I sure did.
Have you?
I did yesterday.
Okay, so you fired a customer and said, that way we can lower spending. Or did you fire that customer because they weren't working out? They weren't providing profit to you? I'm talking about if you have a business, because I know in my business, we have fixed costs. If you have a business and the fixed costs are there, that's an investment in your capacity. In our federal government, we've invested in the capacity. But we've already committed to paying a whole bunch of different things. And if we don't collect enough taxes to pay for those on an ongoing basis, then we run a deficit. It's pure and simple. So until we get those fixed costs under control and decide to do something about them, we shouldn't cut taxes. Because all we're doing is shifting tax burden. It's not as if taxes go down, we're just moving it from one generation to another.
And I think what you touched on here is probably the greatest distinction that, as business people, we see between how business is run and how Washington is run. That is an entity unto itself, preserving itself. And magnanimously wanting to take care of all kinds of people for all kinds of reasons, and come to the taxpayers and say, give us more, because we want to be magnanimous. So you talk as a businessman, and yet that monolith runs anything other than like a business. And that takes me back again to here's this very nice man coming in and talking about things that are very common sense.
Yeah, I guess I would take exception to the idea that government is trying to be magnanimous and taking care of people. I don't think that's necessarily the role of government. And we created the Social Security system because when the Social Security was created, 50% of the elderly were living in poverty. And we said we don't want to do that anymore. But here's the thing, when we created Social Security, the average lifespan was 60 years. And you could start collecting Social Security at 65. And here we are today, the average lifespan is closer to 80. And you can still start collecting Social Security at 65. But it's a program that people pay into and then expect some kind of return from it someday. There's no guarantee though, the courts have already ruled that if you pay into Social Security, there's no guarantee that you get money out. But it's an expectation. But the other part is, you know, a lot of programs that we have today, and I'll use food stamps, I'll use rent assistance, I'll use heat assistance, those types of programs today are because wages haven't grown. Over the last 30 years, wages have been relatively flat. So in order to afford what's going on in this country, we need more wage growth. Because if we actually had wage growth and we actually increased the minimum wage to $15 an hour, we would be able to actually have less funds going into the government for those programs. To me, it's just common sense. Why would we want the government to subsidize jobs? I think you saw the announcement that Walmart had a couple weeks ago where they're going to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour, which I think is a good thing. Because then they can start paying their workers more of a living wage, and we can start passing money to the government to help those workers out. But how many of you were in business during the recession? How hard has it been for you to raise prices since then? It's been a difficult process. In most of this country, I mean, we've had relatively low inflation for how many years now? Because prices just don't go up. But the bottom line is that's really held down wages also. And most of the return has gone to shareholder value. So I think what we need to do is we need a better mix between how do we keep wages growing and we create shareholder value so that we have less reliance on the government to have to step in and be the safety net. I volunteer at a food shelter, in a food pantry. We go there once a month. And here's what's happened over the last year, there's more people. The economy's doing really well right now. Yet there's more and more people that need a food pantry to make ends meet, because we usually go near the end of the month. And that to me is just an indication that the economy isn't working for everybody. So do people need help? Yes, absolutely. Is it the government's role to help everybody? No, absolutely not. Yet it's the biggest safety net we have, and I think it's really important for us to understand that some people just need to step up every now and then. get to where they need to go.
I think we're a compassionate nation, and I don't think anybody in this room would argue that point. The question is, where do you draw those lines? And what's the measure? How do we evaluate those who really need help versus those who have been sort of trained to be helped? You know, the Seligman's learned helplessness kind of idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I don't personally know. I mean, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence of people that are taking advantage of the system. And I think that's something that we should be working on. But that to me goes back to the efficiency and effectiveness of idea of government. We need to invest a lot more into making sure that the people need help getting help. But the idea though that, you know, there's a whole bunch of people who are just want to not work is not true. You know, the interesting thing about this planet is we have close to 7 billion people. And everybody gets out of that every single day trying to get something done. How many of you have ever hired somebody and they seem completely unmotivated? Yeah. Happens all the time, doesn't it? But the bottom line is, as leaders, I always think leadership is really about inspiration. And motivation has to come from the individual. But most of the time people, because they lack the resources to understand what they really even want in life, struggle with that. I work with people all the time, and Susan, you could probably agree with this. The hardest thing for people to really figure out is what they really want to do. And how do we create more of a structure? Because you do this in business all the time. You create a vision and help people get motivated to where they want to go. People need hope, though, to be motivated. There's a lot of people right now that feel that the system is not there to help them. And I think if people had a little more hope and we got people moving, it would actually lower the cost of having to help them. But I also think that we need good wages. You know, my dad was a foreman at A.O. Smith. He raised a family of 5 of us on one salary with a high school education. You can't do that today. It's very difficult to do. So how do we get to that point where parents have more time to spend with their kids? I know a lot of people who are working 2 jobs and still not making it. The last thing they need is a 3rd job. What we need to figure out is how do we get more hands into people so they can take personal responsibility.
And in
It's
fact,
hard.
that is the job you're running for, to go and figure this out.
Yep.
Let's talk trade. Would you vote in favor of ratifying the new trade between the U.S., Mexico, and Canada?
I think there's a lot of good things in the agreement. I think it needs a further in-depth look, but I think it does some things from an intellectual property standpoint. It does some things from a wage growth in Mexico so that jobs stop moving as much to Mexico and there's more jobs in the United States. I think there's some key things in there that we have to look at. Overall, I think there's some things though that we have to relook at. It extends some of the provisions that drug companies have for certain parts of their business, and I'm not sure that's a good idea. But I think overall it's a good package, and I think anytime we're talking about trade and making trade more free and fair, it's a good idea.
How does global policy affect Wisconsin?
Affect Wisconsin, well, let me start with just the globe. Trade has been proven to be one of the best ways to avoid conflict. When we have trading partners around the world, it's really important that we have good trading partners because it breaks down our differences and it creates less of potential for conflict. So trade is good. And I think we've seen that in the last 70 years around the globe, that when we have good trading partners, along with our trading partners, there's less conflict. Now, what does that have to do with Wisconsin, though? I think you've seen the tariff issue. I think there was a town hall at Husco yesterday just to talk about that. You know, one of the things about the tariff issue is we don't, at least in my mind, there's not a plan. This is a sort of a shoot by the hip, let's see what happens, and let's work toward, figuring out how to create better trade. It'd be nice to take a step back and really think about how do we create more of a plan. And because these tariffs are actually hurting people. Jobs are being displaced. Farmers are struggling even more. You know, in the agriculture bill, they wanted to put an extra $12 billion for farmers to make up for the fact that the tariffs went up. That's a reactive process, not a proactive process. So I think if we're gonna do what we're doing, and I'm not saying it doesn't necessarily make sense, I think we do need to address tariffs. I think it'd be better to have a better plan.
And that's, plan, right? Vision, strategy, plan. In a world that moves nanoseconds quick, how much study, how much planning, how much time can we have to be looking at this big picture and putting funds in place. When people are moving constantly, demands are changing, our wants are changing, politicians are being absolutely inundated to say, help me, help me, help me.
Yeah.
How do you find,
Yeah,
where's the time?
yeah, great question. And one of the things that, and I think everybody does this in their business, is when you have big issues and you have more than one, you divide them up. And you have different working groups working on different issues. You know, we have tremendous resources at the federal level. There's a whole bunch of people who would love to help solve problems. By bringing those groups together and creating more working groups, and more groups that are able to look at each issue and say, all right, here are what the scientists think it should be, here are what the economists think it should be, here are what the social services group think it should be. By bringing those groups together and finding some common ground, we can work on more things faster. You know, it's a simple idea of divide and multiply. We've got some serious issues in this country, and we're not working as quickly as we need to in a lot of them.
So information is absolutely everywhere. How, as a congressman, would you look at all of the very smart people, all of the very smart agencies bringing you reams and reams of information? Don't tell me you're gonna give it to your staff, I know that. How are you gonna look at all of that? On what would you base decisions?
Yeah, first and foremost, it's, you know, I personally, the way I get my information is I don't watch TV to get news. I think the news today on TV doesn't really help. It's meant to keep us watching. It's not meant to necessarily inform us. I read a lot. And I not only read about what domestically people are saying, I read internationally what people are saying. How many of you are part of an international business? Anybody in the room? Okay. So you know there are different viewpoints about what's going on in the United States than what we have at home. I'm part of a franchise that's a global franchise. So I know a lot of people from around the world. And getting feedback from them about what's going on is very helpful to see how they view what we're doing. But as far as being able to sort through everything, this goes back to the divide and multiply idea. There's not one person, and I think this is part of where we need to get away from. It's not electing a person who's going to solve the problem. I think what we need to do is we need to elect people that want to create a system that does a better job of consistently solving our problems. Because we're way too reliant on the idea that we need to elect good people, and we always need to elect good people to get things done. We need to elect good people that want to put some good systems in place so that our government continues to work on the things regardless of who's in office. Because I don't want to spend 40 years in Congress. That's the last thing I want to do. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to spend anywhere between 8 and 10 years, because I think that's the right amount. Because it takes a while to get up to speed, but then get things done and then get out. Because by being in there too long, it's really not helping the system move forward.
That last bit generated about 15 new questions in my mind. What I'd like to do is open it up to the group. We've got another half an hour or so, 35 minutes. If there are no more, I can go back into this. But
Does anybody have a question for me? Tim?
So with your experience in business, for me, the idea that government should be run like a business never really made 100% sense to me, because it like you said, it's there to support the background, and there are things government does that you wouldn't do if you're a business, like helping people that need help, that sort of thing. In business, you're more or less trying to increase your revenue and profits. So, in your opinion, what are the biggest, in your mindset of being a business coach and a business owner, what are the big shifts or differences in the idea of now government versus business, and how are they different?
Yeah, great question, Tim. As part of our business, we've done a lot of, we call it pro bono work with nonprofits. So we adopt nonprofits, we call it coaching for a cause, and we'll work with them. And the bottom line is, yeah, they're not interested in how do we grow revenue or anything else, but they are interested in how do they get more dollars into the institution to be able to help more people. But the focus isn't on profit, the focus is on how many people they can help. And more importantly, how do they solve the issue that they're working on. I'll give you an example. I was working with a group, and some of you may be familiar with it, Safe Babies, Healthy Families, out of Waukesha. Just a fabulous organization. And what they did is they found, they basically found young mothers who were in very at-risk situations who were usually homeless. So they found them a place to live. They got them prenatal care. They taught them parenting. they worked with them through the birth, and then they usually kept working with them till that child was anywhere between 2 and 3 years old. You know, just a fantastic program. They got up to helping about 1,800 women in Waukesha County. The problem was there were about 4,600 women that needed help. And they eventually were overwhelmed because they wanted to help everybody and they couldn't find enough funding. They eventually merged in with Easter Seals. So that, here's the way I think about government. Government's just a big nonprofit. We don't want government to make money. We don't want them to ask for more taxes on a regular basis. We want our tax load to decrease. And once again, I'll go back to as a percentage of GDP, I'd love to see that number consistently going down. But the bottom line is we have to take a step back and look at it and say, where are the areas we're actually working and how do we get more bang for our buck? What are the things that we can put in place from a management standpoint, from an education standpoint, from a system standpoint, to make things work better? And I think that's the way we really need to start looking at government. Because how many of you know somebody who works in government? They're a teacher or a firefighter, or, everybody knows somebody. So the government isn't this other organization that somehow needs to be vilified, it's us. And it's really important for us to understand if we want it to work better, we gotta get in there and make it work better. So yes, it's not a business. Government doesn't want more people on food stamps. It wants to decrease that number, but let's have a plan of what to do about that. Great question, thanks.
As it relates to trade and tariffs, doing more research on this, and I actually listened to a call-in for Bank of America, at one of their leading global strategists that did a call on trade. Mm-hmm. And the United States is kind of the tip of the spear on this right now with confronting China, but my understanding is the entire globe is fed up with China. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it comes to intellectual property theft. Yes. And what this leading global strategist was suggesting is, let's just say the Chinese economy is $11–12 trillion. What they should be paying in royalties to the rest of the globe for intellectual property is about $1 trillion. Mm-hmm. So they simply cannot do it. So with your business background, what is the appropriate approach with China to have them remain in the global economy because they have 1.3 trillion potential customers, mm-hmm. but have them play by the rules?
Yeah, it's a tricky issue. It's a fine line. I think we do need to be a lot tougher on China. Their currency has always been an issue. The problem is our government's been running a deficit for years, and guess who's been buying those treasury bonds for years? And then a lot of that money gets invested back in the United States. So we have a symbiotic relationship with China. And we really need to work toward, all right, if we need that relationship to change, how do we get tough where we need to get tough, and what are the other things that we can do? But this is, at least to me, this is the biggest win-win area that we need to figure out moving forward. And it's not only China, it's India. And China's doing a marvelous job of trying to make sure India is going to be its largest trading partner, and we're getting shut out on the sidelines. So I think that whole region we need to take a relook at. But I personally don't think that creating an antagonistic measure on tariffs is the right move to make. It might bring them to the negotiation table, but then if we've not created a good working partnership, the negotiations are going to be harder. But is this a tricky issue? Absolutely. I sat down with the head of the market economics department just to talk about tariffs, because it's one of those areas. How many of you were completely studied in tariffs before the president started talking about tariffs? It's just one of those issues you're like, oh yeah, we do that. And but it's important to take a deeper look into it. And we just need a lot of people looking at this subject to figure out what is the right next step to make. So, but great question. Is there an easy answer there? Absolutely. But that is a huge issue, and that's a huge challenge. And I think it bears us keeping in mind that we need to figure out a way to make that work on both sides. Yes?
Yeah, you mentioned at the beginning that you believe that we should be bipartisan. How would you have voted on Kavanaugh?
Great question. I don't know. I didn't have all the information. I'm not sure anybody in this room had all the information. I do believe, though, that we need to work on making the process less political. I think it's important for us. I do think, though, that one of the reasons it was so politicized is because Congress isn't doing their job. A lot of the things that Congress should be working on has been ceded to the courts. So the courts are having an outsized position on the way we're running our government. And I think Congress needs to step up and pass a lot more legislation so that we don't have to be thinking about who we have on the courts. Because the courts are there as, at least in my mind, as a referee. We need Congress to do a much better job of passing legislation, which is why I'm part of the break the gridlock idea.
But if you had had enough information, would you have gone against the Democrats if you felt that it wasn't right? I mean, I think that's the value of having somebody who's not a political guy.
Yeah, I would have looked at it based on the facts. You know, one of the things I can commit to when I get there is I'm not gonna vote party line on everything. You know, and I really think it makes a lot of sense for us to take a step back and look at things, because I already disagree with a lot of, with things with other Democrats. You know, when I talk about Foxconn, there's a lot of Democrats that say, oh, we hate Foxconn. I'm like, hold on just a minute. This can be a game changer. Yet, I don't think we have to change the environmental rules. I don't think we have to pay $200,000 for a job. You know, my company in the last 4 years, we've helped create 2,000 net new jobs. Those are small businesses, and we've done the math on that. We can do it for about anywhere between $2,500 and $3,000 a job. That's a heck of a lot less than $200,000. And when I look at it as a small business owner, if there's $4.5 billion to help grow jobs in Wisconsin, how much of that should be going to small business owners, who frankly could use a lot more help and have a lot less access to capital? So, yes?
You talk about universal health care and the government running it. Can you give me one or two examples of where the federal government does a good job managing anything?
I think Medicare. I think if you talk to people, I don't know if anybody's getting close to that age, but I know a lot of people get really excited when they get close to Medicare age because they know that they get to stop worrying about their health care. Most people who are on Medicare like it works. The VA healthcare system mostly works. Are there always issues? Absolutely. I was in the military. I would say the military works really well. I would say the fire department works really well. I would say the police departments work really well. I mean, you can go on and talk about government.
Federal government, not local governments.
Okay, well, see, I view government as government. And I think by us parsing it out and saying the federal government is completely different than state governments and local governments, everybody has to work together. It's been interesting. One of the things I committed to on this run was working with all the candidates in every single election in this area. Because if we're not on the same page and we're not working together on things, and I've met with a lot of Republicans, at least the ones that would take a meeting, just to get feedback. I met with Sean O'Reilly, who's the mayor of Waukesha. We just sat down and had a conversation, like, what are your concerns and what do you need to have now? So I think we need more people who want to talk across the aisle. This break the gridlock, Mike Gallagher is one of the co-sponsors of the bill. We're going to have a conversation hopefully in the next week because I want to find out why he signed on. He's a Republican. Because I think we need to understand each other a little bit and work together. But I think government can function. I think it does well most of the time. I think we only hear the story that it doesn't work. Yes?
You had mentioned earlier about putting the minimum wage up to $15 an hour, and then you also mentioned in the same sentence about how that is going to help fund the government. So I'm a little confused on how that would all come together, and if you could talk a little bit further about why that requirement would help the government versus businesses, and why that would help us go forward.
Yeah, here's what's happening. So if there's a low-wage job, and let's say somebody's working that low-wage job and that's their main job, because there's a lot of people who work low-wage jobs and that's their main job, is they can't make ends meet. So they end up also being on some kind of rent assistance or food stamps or some other way, some other government payment to cover the fact that what they're making on a 40-hour job isn't getting them to where they need to go. So if we can raise up minimum wage, theoretically then we'll have to pay less into government programs, which they have to pay them. So we actually cut out some administrative costs and we pay them directly. Will we have to pay a little bit more? I think McDonald's did a study and said it would add like 17 cents to a Big Mac to pay $15 minimum wage. We would have to pay more, but that idea of us paying more is we're now using the capitalistic structure and we're getting rid of going through the government to make those payments. So in theory, it makes sense, but what we need to do is we need to make sure minimum wage is indexed to inflation so we don't have to keep having these discussions. So that we can increase those bottom levels. Because there's a lot of people right now who do minimum wage jobs and that's the job that they have.
But that's your choice.
Well, and choice is a really interesting discussion. you've, let's say you graduate from certain school systems and you don't have an education level to be able to get to where you need to go, you didn't choose where you were born. You went through that system, and I think it's up to us to give people the option. I've hired lots of people over the years who have given them a chance when no one else would give them a chance, because they didn't necessarily have the right background or the right skill sets. And I think a lot of you in this room do exactly the same thing. But it really is, we have to bridge that gap between giving, if we're expecting people to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, the first bootstrap is education. And right now, education is unequal across our state and across our country. We need to fix our educational system to make sure people have the access to the education they need. And we can't blame their family or their parents or anything else. We need to figure out from a economic structure, how do we create a more stable neighborhood? How do we create a more stable society so that everybody has that access to that education? I tell the story, my daughter, she went through the Elmbrook School District. So she went to Brookfield Central. She graduated with 53 college credits. Graduated high school with 53 college credits because she took every single AP course she could. And then she graduated from Madison in 3 years because she could. Also have good friends and a brother who are MPS teachers. And the way they describe the day of how they teach is night and day compared to, my wife has a nephew who teaches AP biology at Brookfield Central. We need to get to a place where children have a chance to learn, because when they have a chance to learn, they have a chance to make better choices in life. So there's no good answer to that, there's no easy answer to that, but I think our educational system, we need to invest a lot more in figuring out how do we make sure that kids aren't punished for where they live.
I think that's very different than the $15 an hour though.
Well, but the 15 starts to create more economic fairness, and it starts to create the ability for people to have maybe less than 2 jobs. Because I know my dad had 1 job, raised a family. He didn't have to have 2 jobs. There's a lot of people right now who have to work a lot more than 40 hours just to make ends meet. And think about how that impacts their childcare. Think about how that impacts their health care. Think about how it impacts the rest of their life.
I think we have time for maybe one more question.
Okay, then let's go to Bill.
Susan started this by asking you why you thought you could get people to listen. What's the reason you're running? This is a tough district for a Democrat. So, 2-part question perhaps, what makes you think you can win in this heavily conservative district? And if, by chance, you don't, do you plan to continue in politics?
Yeah, great questions. First and foremost, when I ran, I knew what I was up against. Historically, this district has been close to what I would call a 70-30 district. I think the last person that really put a committed campaign together to run against Mr. Sensenbrenner was Brian Kennedy back in 04 and 06. So there really hasn't been a true campaign run. There's been candidates. But one of the things I committed to when we started this run was to create an infrastructure for the run. Because I personally believe that we need to end gerrymandering. And it will end eventually, and we'll have much more even congressional districts in the state. So, because I think you already know, I'm not entirely wedded to every single Democratic policy there is. And I also don't think every Republican is dangerous. I think there's a big common ground in the middle. And most of us want that common ground. So my goal was to be able to make a run and talk to people and say, look, we might differ in opinion, yet we're still human beings. We can still find common ground and make things happen. Because just because I disagree with you on one thing doesn't mean we have to disagree on everything. In fact, we should disagree on a few things. And also I thought if I can get out there and have a chance to talk to people. Because the interesting thing about this district is there's a core of Democrats and there's a core of Republicans, but it's mostly independent. And we've been talking to a lot of different independents over the last 18 months. And independents want one thing. They want the bickering to stop. And they want things to happen. So, will I do anything else in politics? The answer is yes. I decided that we were at a point in our lives, and Terry's in agreement on this, that it's time to give back and lead. I don't know what that's going to look like. When we win, I know exactly what I'm going to do. we don't win, then we'll figure that out as we go. But I think it's important to understand that everybody has a voice. And I'm not here to get you all to agree with me. I just would hopefully like you to understand my position, or I was hoping to understand your position. So hopefully that answers the question.
And with that, I thank you, Tom, very much for your time and your